Hello, my quilting friends. My name is Leah Day, and welcome to this Longarm Quilting Basics video. One of the most confusing things that I really struggled with when I was setting up my longarm for the first time was attaching the encoders. This device is responsible for regulating the stitches. Basically, as the machine is moving, the regulator, the wheel on this regulator is spinning, and that is what keeps your stitches the same size and shape no matter whether you're moving forward and back or side to side. But this is a little bit tricky and a little confusing to attach. So I'm going to show you in this video how to attach the encoders to both the Grace Qnique hoop frame and the Continuum frame. So let's get started. So I'm here on my Qnique hoop frame, and I have already loosened up this back left hand wheel. So this is the wheel that doesn't have the channel lock on it. As you can see on the other back wheel, I've got the channel lock attached. It's kind of big and clunky. So I want to put the encoder on the other wheel. So I've already loosened this up, and I'm just going to take out that screw. And you want to be careful because there is a spacer that is included that's behind that, and you don't want to lose that spacer. So here we go. I've got the screw that went through that wheel, I've got the wheel, I've got the spacer. So now I'm going to grab my encoder. You want the lower encoder, and you want to make sure that this screw here is nicely turning, that it's not too tight, and that this area hasn't been tightened either. So you want that to be freely turning. Okay. So now I'm going to place the wheel onto that encoder just like so. And you notice that this wheel doesn't have like a raised area on either side, so it's really a symmetrical wheel. Some wheels have a right side and a wrong side, so definitely pay attention to that. Okay, so this looks good. I've got the spacer in place. Now I'm going to put it back on the carriage. So I'm going to slide this up and just hold onto the carriage. I'm just lifting it straight up off the back table, and then I'm just screwing in that screw. So I'm just going to tighten this up real nice and snug, then wiggle my screwdriver out, and now place it back on the tabletop. You want to make sure that that encoder wheel is spinning, and it's kind of hard to see tucked up in there. But one thing I do is mark a little line with a permanent magic marker on the white part that's on the inside, and mark that, and then you can see the wheel spinning so much easier. Okay, to make sure that this encoder stays in contact with that rail, that's really how this works. We want to make sure it stays nicely in contact with the rail. We need to add tension to it with this spring. So what we do is we take the spring and we rotate it up to the 12 o'clock position. Then I grab this hex screwdriver and I tighten that smaller screw right there. Now it's a little bit tricky to get to because it's tight and it's in that tight spot. So I'm going to again lift up on the carriage, lift up on that encoder. I kind of want to keep it flat though. This is a little tricky, but just be patient with it. It really helps to have an extra set of hands here. That can be really helpful. Okay, that looks good. Let's see if that's going to be holding right. Looks like I went just a little bit too high with that, so I'm going to loosen it back up ever so slightly. And I want it to be kind of in the 12 o'clock position so that it's kind of like a little loop of metal here is in the 12 o'clock position. Now I'm going to get this tightened up. And the last step is to plug in this telephone cord. It's kind of cool. That plugs in to the back of the encoder right here, and you want the longer one for this lower encoder because it's going to need to be able to stretch the furthest. Okay, so that is how we attach that encoder. Now let's attach the one for the machine. So I've taken the back left wheel off of the back end of my Grace Qnique 15R, and I'm just going to pop that screw out. And this wheel does have a right and wrong side. As you can see, we've got a higher ridge and then a slightly flatter side. So I want to make sure that that flat side goes to the inside of my encoder, just like so. And that's the way it's supposed to attach to the machine. And again, you want to make sure that this is loose so that way you can screw it on here. Now you might find that you have to lift up that corner of the machine. Again, it's really nice if you have an extra set of helping hands. I'm going to grab my screwdriver, and this one's a lot easier to attach. So I'm just going to tighten this up nice and tight. You do not want your wheels to come off, so make sure it's nice and tight and screwed in all the way. So I actually moved the entire carriage over slightly, and I locked it in place with my channel locks so that way it can't move, and that's a really good tip. And it's nice if you can kind of steer it so that you're off the edge of the frame over here, and that gives you room to use your tool. So I'm just going to tighten this up once more, make sure that that is as tight as it can go without being too tight. That looks great. Okay, and again, we want to make sure that this encoder stays in contact with that rail. You know, see how it rolls back and forth here. We want to make sure that there's tension on that, so that way the wheel is always rolling anytime that the machine moves. So that's why we use this encoder spring. And this spring for the upper encoder is silver. So now I'm going to take that little loop of metal, that top loop of metal, this is what tensions the spring. I'm going to take it to the 12 o'clock position and then tighten it down with that other smaller screw. There we go. That looks good. And then again, just to make sure that the encoder wheel and all of the wheels on your Grace Qnique machine are rolling, you can just take and put a little mark on that edge, a little mark right here on the plastic, the white plastic, and just use a black permanent magic marker, and then you'll be able to see it rolling around really easily. And then you'll know if you need to adjust anything. All of these wheels can be adjusted back and forth that way. So just in case you need to do any sort of adjustment like that, it's really good to have that visual. But this is looking terrific, and all that remains is plugging in this encoder. It comes in the plug right here, and it is the shorter length of cord. So here we go. I have attached that shorter cord, and then I just plug it in here on the back of the machine. And this is color coded. You can see these are tagged with green, and then there's two little spots that are tagged with green here on the back of the machine. So that's where those plug in. And then now we'll give them a test. I'm going to turn on the machine. So here we go. When we go from side to side, this tests the back encoder. And you just want to find that as you push it over at the same rate, it stays running at the same rate. Now I'm going to go forward and back. You can see that is rolling the side encoder, and that is definitely working too. So that is how you set up your encoders on the Grace Qnique 15R setup on the Q-Zone hoop frame. So I'm here on the Grace Qnique 21 on the Continuum frame. And this attachment is going to be identical for either the 21 or the 15R because you're attaching to the wheel on the back left-hand side of the machine, as you can see here, and then you're also going to attach the other encoder to the back left-hand side of the carriage. So here is the encoder that goes on the machine. I've got a silver spring here, and it also says upper. So that lets us know this is the correct encoder to go on this upper part of the machine. And I've got a few stickers here. I'm just going to get these. Looks like that one could probably just stay there. It's fine. Now remember, you want this part, this little bend in the metal part, to be nice and loose and that screw to easily turn. Now here is the wheel. And again, we have a situation where the wheel has a right side and a wrong side. If you take the wheel off and you forget and you're kind of shuffling around going, well, how does it go back on? Take a look at one of the other wheels and you will see that the raised section needs to go against the machine. So this is going to slot onto the encoder just like that. Now the encoder itself needs to face the front of the machine, and here's the reason why. If you have the encoder facing this way, guess what's going to do? It's going to limit how far you can quilt. You won't be able to quilt to the back end of your carriage. So make sure that your encoder is facing this way. Okay, so now I'm going to line this up. And it is easier if you pull your machine back, so it's hanging off the back end of the Continuum frame. That definitely helps, because then you can access these screws easily with your hex wrenches. So I'm going to tighten this up. Now this cord that you see here is actually already attached to this lower encoder. So just don't be confused by that. I don't have the cord right now plugged into this encoder. Okay, so I want to get this nice and tight so that wheel is not going to come off. That looks good. Okay, so now I take that little loop of metal just like before, and I take it and I pull it into an upright position. So it's at the 12 o'clock position. Then I take my 2mm wrench and I tighten up that little screw on that loop of metal. Give that a good tighten, and you can see that adds nice tension to that encoder. Make sure that it's going to stay on that track. And then you can see it rolling really nicely, and this is looking great. Okay, one last step with this encoder. We want to plug in this shorter cord. You can see it's also labeled with green. I'm going to plug this in to the encoder. There's kind of like a right way to stick this in. You just have to go around until you find the way it fits nicely. That little telephone cord connection. And then that goes into any of the green slots. There's 2 green slots here, labeled on the side of the 21 or on the back side of the 15. So it's a little different for the 2 different machines, but not much. There we go, all plugged in, ready to go. Now I'll show you how I attach this lower encoder. So I'm on the back left side of the carriage, and I have placed the wheel. I just unscrewed the wheel and placed that so you have the thicker side towards the carriage, right onto the encoder, and I have the encoder facing to the left. And again, the reason I don't want it facing this way is because as the machine moves over to the edge of the frame, that would limit the amount of space the machine can quilt because the encoder would hit the side of the frame. So you want it facing to the inside. Okay? So again, make sure that little loop of metal that controls the spring is nice and loose. And this is a black spring. Black spring goes on the back, or is the lower encoder. There we go. Nice and tight, not going anywhere. Lift that spring up to the 12 o'clock position. That's putting tension on that spring. Give that a tighten with your other hex wrench, little one. And then you can see how I've attached here. You've got a little sticky loop that you can use a little zip tie, and that locks your cord in place. It can still move a little bit, and that's nice. That way you won't roll over it with your wheels. And then that just plugs in just like so. And then the other end of the cord, again, plugs right into the side of the machine, the green label. So that's it for this video. I hope you learned a lot and that this has helped you get your encoders attached so you can begin quilting. If you'd like to learn more about Grace Company long arms or our awesome quilting frames, you can find all Grace products at leahday.com/grace. I am a dealer for Grace Company, and I absolutely love using these long arm machines and frames. So come and check them out at leahday.com/grace, and don't forget to use the coupon code Hello My Quilting Friends whenever you place an order from my website for a long arm machine or frame. Until next time, let's go quilt.